And now, we're going to listen to our brother Jeremy Coleman from West Covina. He was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and he was really looking forward to the paradise earth where he could play with lions and tigers. But God had different plans.
Well, I want to thank Cynthia for inviting me to speak. It's a real honor to get to come up here and share my story. I really feel honored that I got invited to be able to share my testimony today. And I wanted to start off by saying, being that this is being recorded, and I understand this will probably be on YouTube somewhere, it's quite possible that somebody who knew me before, maybe at Bethel, or maybe somebody who is beginning to question the organization, they may see me on this video and they might be wondering, what in the world is he doing at a place like that? So I wanted to start off by saying that I can assure you that I did not leave the organization because of petty grievances, because I was merely a fault finder who had trivial resentments against the organization, or because I was a murmurer and just didn't want to serve shoulder to shoulder with the brothers, as the Society's publications say. I was totally devoted to the organization, but there were so many things that just deeply bothered my conscience, and I just couldn't go along with them anymore. What really bothered me was going door to door and asking people who had been born and raised in, let's say, the Catholic Church or the Lutheran Church to go over their faith with a fine-tooth comb, to question every aspect of their faith, and that if anything was out of kilter, for them to take a stand and leave the religion of their birth. I was going door to door and asking people to do that when I myself wasn't even willing to do the same kind of investigation in my own faith. And not only that, I was proclaiming these people as unworthy of surviving Armageddon because they were unwilling to look at Watchtower publications. And that really began to deeply bother my conscience. I began to ask myself, what gives me the right to judge these people this way? And what makes me so special that I'm worthy of surviving Armageddon just because I happened to be born into the organization? And that really, really bothered me deeply. And I couldn't go out in service and teach things that I just knew were not true anymore. And I had to take a stand, and I had to leave the organization. So I still have a deep love for Jehovah's Witnesses. I still care about a lot of people in the organization. I wish I could have them in my life, but that is not a possibility now. So to all of you, just a little bit about my background. I was born into a Jehovah's Witness family. All of my immediate family were witnesses. Most of my relatives are still witnesses. My parents were baptized in the late 60s. My mom was baptized, I think, in 1968. My father was baptized, I think, around 1970. And I think growing up in the organization as a child, I think I had sort of spirituality in my DNA, for lack of better terms. Religion was appealing to me, even as a small child, the thought of worshiping God and learning about God and doing God's will, and learning about Jesus and some of the characters of the Bible. That was really appealing to me. I liked that. Some of my first memories were going to the conventions at Dodger Stadium, and this was back in the late 70s, early 80s, obviously, because there was no internet. I think apostates had to have a lot more of a physical presence at conventions. So I remember when we would leave the convention, there would always be upwards of, like 20, 30 apostates outside with signs, and I think Land was probably there. No, he wasn't. He wanted to be there. But I remember as we were driving out, my family would always get really tense, and my mom would say, "Don't look at the signs." And I was, maybe 4 or 5. I didn't even know what the signs said. I just remember that saw these hand-painted signs with an old guy with a beard with no mustache and a bunch of numbers on the sign, looked like dates, and I thought, what are they talking about? I know a lot of them. I know to a little kid, a lot of them actually look kind of scary looking. I mean, a lot of them were very disheveled looking, and some of them even had megaphones, and they were shouting slogans, and as a little kid they looked kind of scary. So from a very early age I learned that we Jehovah's Witnesses are in the true religion, we're in the true organization, and we have enemies outside the organization that are trying to disrupt our worship and who are trying to tear us away from Jehovah. And from a very early age, I think I also had a very strong fear of demons. That was definitely a phobia that was instilled in me from a very early age. A lot of you probably remember back, I think it was in the late 70s, when there was a lot of public attention given to the rock group Led Zeppelin when they released that particular single, Stairways to Heaven, and people were playing it backwards and finding satanic messages in it. I remember my two older brothers had that album, and there was a lot of controversy surrounding that. And I remember within our particular congregation, I remember that was a big issue, was music, and I remember people were going through all their music. I remember people taking seemingly innocent artists like Marvin Gaye and Diana Ross and playing them backwards, trying to find a satanic message. I don't know what you would have heard, Kenny Rogers sang in a backwards record, but so from a really early age, I had these fears. I had this fear that outside the protective confines of the organization, there was demons, enemies of Jehovah, and within the protective cocoon of the organization, if you will, that was the only place where you could find safety. And growing up, my mom started to study with me in the My Book of Bible Stories book. And I loved that book. I have to admit, I loved the stories about Moses and King David, David slaying Goliath, and the apostles. The stories, I really enjoyed them as a child. And I think studying that book as a child, that was very, very instrumental in sort of laying the groundwork for the indoctrination that I would have as a Jehovah's Witness. Not to get too analytical or Freudian, but I think that the My Book of Bible Stories book inadvertently is a very powerful indoctrination tool for the average witness child, in that the person studying with him inadvertently draws parallels from many of the Old Testament accounts, and draws parallels between those and aspects of the modern day organization. For example, I remember studying the chapter about Moses and Aaron, and the Israelites murmuring against them. And there's a parallel drawn between that and the modern day organization. And the modern day society, or the governing body, is likened to Moses and Aaron, and murmuring against them is sort of likened to us complaining about the organization. The story in the My Book of Bible Stories book about the Israelites and being in the wilderness and being provided with manna and complaining about that. There was a parallel drawn between that and the modern day organization providing us spiritual food through magazines, assemblies, meetings, and complaining about these provisions was just like those Israelites complaining about the manna. And so with that established, as I got into adulthood, and the overseers and elders through the convention talks and meeting parts, when they would draw parallels between these Old Testament, Old Covenant relations and liken them to the modern day organization or the modern day governing body, there didn't seem to be anything off kilter about that. I just accepted it at face value because those things had been indoctrinated with me. And also, I think studying the story of Noah and his preaching activity, as a little kid, I could have the satisfaction of going door to door, and if people laughed at us or made fun of me, I could have the satisfaction of believing that we were just like Noah, going to preach to people, and that well, if they laughed at us, well, they're going to get destroyed at Armageddon, just like the people who laughed at Noah did. So I think these were very powerful things. And so as I got older, my mom would study a little bit more complicated material with me. As I got a little bit older, she studied I think it was called "You Can Live Forever in Paradise Earth," the big red book, when I was old enough to comprehend it. And in that, I learned more about the nuts and bolts of the organizational doctrinal structure, 144,000, why not all people go to heaven, why we don't believe the Trinity and hellfire and things like that. So I got trained in the finer points of why we know this is the truth. When I was a child, I was convinced this was the truth, but I didn't know why. And so as I learned this new material, I was even further convinced that we had the truth. I still have a lot of respect for my mom because growing up, my dad was baptized, but he was the type of person that never reached out for activity in the organization, never reached out to be a ministerial servant. He was never really involved with any of us kids at all. I think he was the type that he knew how to be a good provider. He always provided what we needed physically, but in terms of being a father figure, he just was the type, he didn't know how to do that. He was very cold, distant person. So all of the responsibilities of training, taking us out in field service, studying with us, all of that landed on the shoulders of my mother, and I was the youngest of 5 kids. So to this day, I have a lot of respect for her in that she was convinced that she was doing the right thing, and she was convinced that she was inculcating scriptural truths in us. So as I grew up and got into adolescence, early teenage years, I think that's when I really became committed to the organization. One thing that I began to develop was a lot of resentment towards my father, because my father never reached out for any kind of organizational privileges. Now, what I observed in the organization was a lot of brothers who were doing that. They were reaching out, becoming elders, giving these very good, eloquent public talks and talks at the conventions. And I always envied the other kids my age who had fathers like that, because in my mind, that was sort of the symbol of what success was. I saw those kind of male figures as very strong men who were very good fathers, very good husbands, and that was everything that my dad wasn't. And I remember my mom saying to me that she never really got included with a lot of the other families because her husband wasn't an elder. There seemed to be a clique where only the elders' families would hang out with each other, and my mom was always very depressed about that, and that stirred a lot of anger in me, that she didn't have that. And so that made me determined that when I got older, I wanted to be everything that my dad wasn't. I wanted to be one of those men in the organization that people looked up to, who would be involved in conventions and give very, very eloquent talks and have positions of responsibility. I never really enjoyed field service very much, but as I got into high school, I started to think about full-time work a little bit more. I remember I would always hear through the assemblies and through Watchtower articles how college was very much discouraged. And when they would give talks at the assemblies and talk about going to college, you always heard the very worst case scenarios of what happened to people who went to college. They would always dredge up the most sordid examples of people going to college. You'd hear about the pioneer brother who went off to college and he ended up as a gay porn star.